This is the second interview in a series which we propose to continue, and it's My Life, My Practice. And today Miguel Romero is joining me, and we're going to talk about his life and his practice. And Miguel was a monk at Birken Monastery, Sitavana, for a good period of time. And we met quite some years ago at the early Shack Monastery. So I just want to get started back with his personal history. So you're actually born in Mexico.
Yes,
you're a Mexican citizen originally.
Yes, originally a Mexican citizen. Nowadays I am also a Canadian citizen. I was born in Mexico City. I did most of my studies there. I am a chemist. I studied chemistry at the University of Mexico, did my undergrad and master's there, and then decided to come to Canada and pursue a PhD, also in organic chemistry.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go back and talk a little bit about your early days. Mexico is a Catholic country, one of the most Catholic countries. I've been there due to your family connections, and on several occasions I've been down to teach. In Mexico, we went, did some things in Mexico City and retreats outside of that. There's even some Theravada forest monasteries in Mexico. And when I was down there, it reminded me a little bit of Thailand in some ways, because instead of Buddha images everywhere, in Thailand you see Buddha images of the hills and in the cities and everything. In Mexico you see almost the equivalent number of crucifixes and religious saint icons and so forth everywhere. And of course the churches, fantastic churches. So it's, in some ways it reminded me of Thailand. It's tropical, semi-tropical, and steeped, absolutely steeped in a religious feel.
Right.
So, and now of course it's Catholic though. So how does a Mexican boy encounter Buddhism? When in your life did you encounter any hear at all about the Buddha?
Yeah, I guess it's a similar case to some other Mexicans who have become Buddhists. Probably their first contact is through books. Mm-hmm. And in my case it was an interesting story, because it was not that I directly read a book about Buddhism or the Buddha, but it was through a summary that my mother gave us about the life of the Buddha. She was an avid reader, and oftentimes at lunch she would give us a summary of whatever she had read,
right.
Whatever book, But certainly the one that impressed me the most, and that's the only one I remember, in fact, is A Life of the Buddha.
Ah.
So she gives in this summary, I was about 10 or 11 years old, so she made it like a nice children's story. And I was fascinated and very intrigued by it. What really puzzled me was the fact that Prince Siddhartha had left the palace, and I just couldn't understand why he had done that. I mean, at my age, and understanding that he had all these things at his disposal, great food and horses and whatnot, was very, very puzzling. And I guess that really stayed in my mind for many years. It wasn't quite resolved at that time. I remember having asked my mother, why would he do a thing like that? And she would say, well, he was seeking enlightenment. But she couldn't quite explain exactly what this enlightenment thing was. So that answer would come much later.
Right. Now, how do you think your mother came across this book? I mean, she was just a wide reader. She would read anything that came to her hands. Yeah. I want to just talk a little bit about your family. So, your family, we visited your family's home, and it was outside of Mexico City,
Right.
and a beautiful place, spacious, and in a smaller. What's the name of the
Tehuacan.
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 Yeah. And so they were quite. They were sophisticated people. Your mother, of course, is still alive, and she has a broad knowledge of a huge range of things. And
Right.
your father was a
He was a PhD in chemistry.
PhD in chemistry from Harvard.
From Harvard.
And
Harvard
was
graduate.
he was born in Mexico as well?
He was born in Mexico.
So he was just smart, and
He was very smart. Yeah.
and how did he get shipped off to Harvard?
He got a scholarship. Yeah.
Right.
He got a scholarship.
Yeah.
He did very well when he when he was an undergrad, and he did so well that he got support.
Wow. And your mother is an architect.
Yeah, also a PhD in architecture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is a very highly educated, very intelligent family. And you got exposed to a range of things. And are they particularly religious?
Well, during a certain period of my life, they weren't. Well, my father never was really.
Yeah.
He was purely a scientist. That was his religion.
Yeah,
Science was his religion.
Yeah.
Right. And my mother had a conversion, maybe when I was in my 20s, I think, when that happened. She became a Franciscan. And I think this happened partly as a result of her research work, which was on restoration of 17th century Franciscan monasteries. So
And
there was also a connection there with monasticism,
Yeah.
And of course you can imagine that was all she talked about.
Right.
So I was bombarded with. We were, I guess,
Yeah.
my sister and my brother as well. So we knew all about how they were designed and how the monks lived and so on. So
Right.
all these things get into your head somehow.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
also in Mexico, there is a widespread monastic community. Even now, as the Catholic nuns order decreases in the West, in North America, it's plummeted, and even in Europe, I know that they import Mexican nuns to Spain to
Right.
fill the nunneries. But
Right.
you would have seen lots of priests
Oh,
around.
yes.
Of course, there's
Yes.
churches everywhere. There's monasteries, lots of nuns
Lots
around.
of nuns walking around on the street.
Yeah, so
Certainly.
very interesting.
Oh, yes.
This is what we call in the Buddhist tradition samana sanya, the perception of the. Remember, the Buddha, the last of the four signs
Right.
was some sort of mendicant or yogi walking off to the woods after he'd seen the old man, the sick man, and the dead man, which disturbed him. Then he saw this monastic type, who would have been pre-Buddhist type monastic, but it affected him that they were looking for the meaning behind the situation. So he would have been aware of these nuns.
Right.
And I remember you telling me a story about, I think, even a nun teaching you to ride a motorcycle.
Oh yes, it was the other way around. She asked me to teach her how to ride a motorcycle because she was doing her work up in the mountains in the state of Oaxaca. So it was like these dirt roads with mud. Mm-hmm. So she wanted to know how to ride a motocross bike, which are the ones that you can use in the mud and the
Yes.
dirt. And it was amazing. Just I could witness the power of her conviction. She really wanted to get her job done with these people up in the mountains, and she didn't have good access, so she sought the fastest, most efficient way to get to the people, and she learned, and she did use the motorcycle and so on.
Yeah,
So it was quite a story. Yeah.
That's a very cute image. That
Yeah.
The use of technology to get things across. So you had these things floating around in your consciousness, the idea of monastics and all this, but you went off into. I mean, a huge influence in your life is the science, and so you went off to study science, and you were quite fascinated. You were telling a little story about your father really catching your attention by offering to show you how to make TNT dynamite.
Oh yes, right. Well, my memories, go quite far back in terms of my father teaching me chemistry when I was a kid, and it was usually perhaps after dinner, most likely. After dinner, we would have a chat, and then I would stay with him, and then he would just pull out a paper napkin, take a pen, and start scribbling on the napkin all these chemical formulas, and he would very carefully explain whatever chemical concept. So I was really fascinated because it was one of his ways to reach me. We had this bond through the chemistry teaching, and then I guess when I was old enough, maybe I was about 12 years old, something like that. He told me on one occasion, we're gonna do an experiment. You're gonna really like it. What are we gonna do? We're gonna make TNT, trinitrotoluene. I said, really? I mean, really? I said, yeah. Isn't it dangerous? Yeah, it's dangerous, but no problem. It will take us a couple of days. Yeah. So we did spend the whole weekend in his lab preparing just a few grams of the stuff, and it was we didn't detonate it, just prepared it. So it was fascinating just to watch him, manipulate the glassware, and it was I was caught. He really. Yeah. I guess it was his intention that I become a chemist, and I happily did actually. Yeah. Yeah.
Now you went off to Mexico City University.
University of Mexico.
And you did your undergraduate there.
Yeah. And then a master's.
Now this is you're in you're 18 to about 22 or something like this.
Right.
And what was your view of the world at that time?
Well,
did you have any existential concerns?
Yes. Yeah. I must say at that time, I did feel a little bit of pressure, to get into the family business, because they had this poultry business, and they also made vaccines and all kinds of things, all the things related to agriculture and even mining, and I think my mother and my father would have liked that I get involved in the business, but I really tried to avoid it. I didn't really want to know anything about business. So one way to get out was keep studying chemistry. Yeah. So when I finished the master's, my father said to me, well, you got a master's now, you have enough, to get around, if you want, you can. And I said, well, is there another option? Well, of course, you may continue studying if you want. And I said, yeah, I'll do a PhD.
Right. So also you were talking about your father's conversation around home tended to be about business.
Right.
But your mother thought it was a little imbalanced. So tell a little bit about that sort of attempt to balance the atmosphere.
In her attempt to balance things was precisely, she came up with a very skillful thing, which was to give us a summary of the latest book she had read.
Yeah.
So this happened, maybe for a couple of years. Almost every day we had and even my father was very interested, of course. So this went on for some time. So that kind of, made things a bit more palatable in the family.
Yeah, and that's how you managed to hear that little story of the Buddha, which sort of stayed in your head.
Right.
So anyway, now you're leaving this. It's a curious kind of thing. You're embedded in science in one of the most Catholic countries in the world.
Right.
You're surrounded by this stuff, but you're more or less engulfed in a scientific worldview. And so then you went off to. Well, wait a sec. Let's talk about when was your first encounter on your own with any kind of reading about Buddhism or meditation or any of that kind of stuff?
Well, it happened in, the very first one happened in Mexico. And that happened when I read a book called The Third Eye. The author was Lobsang Rampa. And it was kind of a wacky sort of book because it was quite fascinating. If I remember correctly, it was about a man that had gone to Tibet and he was seeking to have his third eye opened, so to speak. And so he went to these Tibetan monasteries and he sought these teachers, and they put him through these grueling tests, you know, that were necessary for them to open the third eye. And then eventually I think he got it. But I think it was some kind of a surgery, if I remember correctly, you know, like a trepanation or something like that. It was really weird, but it had to do with Buddhism and Tibetan monks. So that also intrigued me, you know, because it also talked about superpowers, you know, these psychic abilities of the monks, to read the mind and so on. So that was fascinating.
And were you in college, or how old were you then?
No. When I read that one, I must have been around 14 years old.
I see.
Yeah.
And so you went off to immerse yourself really in not just sciences, but chemistry in particular.
Yes.
You had a real affinity for chemistry, not physics.
No.
Not biology.
Not math.
Chemistry.
Just chemistry. Yeah.
I can see that be an influence from your father, you know, kind of that
Yes.
transmission there. So then you went on to, you decided you're going to go on and do a PhD in science. You went up to, tell us a little bit about that journey.
Well, as I mentioned, I think one of the reasons, there were many reasons why I wanted to pursue the PhD program at UBC, but one of them was certainly to get away from having to work with the family.
What was that about? Are you sort of non-materialistic? Is that your sort of character? Like you never really were looking to make a lot of money?
Not
or
interested in money.
Ambition about
Exactly.
worldly ambition, so you're kind of a little bit on the spiritual side anyway.
Right, but it wasn't. I wouldn't say I was really, not yet. I wasn't really pretty much into spirituality, really. It was just like a general aversion to money and this business thing. Because I had heard so much through my life. I just thought it was so boring, you know, like that I just wanted to run away from it. And chemistry was fun enough. I really started enjoying chemistry when I did the master's. I really knew it was my vocation. So then I was really enthusiastic. You know, this was the other reason. I was really, really interested in chemistry. So I wanted to do a PhD, and at that time I found out about this professor in UBC, Professor Edward Pierce, really good chemist, Canadian chemist, fantastic chemist. So I wanted to work with him. So that was motivation.
So you arrived in Vancouver, and must have been just a totally different atmosphere from your...
Yeah, it was difficult. My English wasn't really very good, so I struggled a lot. You know, when you first arrive, you don't have friends and you're alone, and you have to find a suitable place, and you don't know the language very well, and you're already on the PhD program taking courses. So it was very stressful. It was very difficult. Yeah.
But
and at that time I was into drinking a little. I used to, you know, enjoy drinking, and that eventually became a little bit of a problem, and that also had to do a lot with why I really sided towards Buddhism, because it was right in the middle of the PhD program, which, as I say, was very stressful. And so one of my ways out was to drink, usually on weekends, you know, and a lot. So then I came across another book. I remember exactly, it was a weekend, it was a Saturday, and I wasn't feeling very well. And this book was What the Buddha Taught by Wapola Rahula. And it was my first contact with Theravada Buddhism. So I started reading the book, I remember, and I had a little bit of a hangover. And so I started finding out about the Noble Truths. Now, I couldn't put the book down. It was just the most fascinating revelation, really.
Yeah.
Seriously, it had so much impact. And I remember that edition, which I believe was a later edition, at the very end had some basic instructions on meditation. So when I finished the book, I decided I want to learn how to I want to meditate, and I want to learn how to meditate. And I remember getting out of bed and just sitting, and I attempted, to follow the instructions, read sort of general, brief instructions. And I remember at that very same sitting, I came to the conclusion that drinking and meditation were just absolutely incompatible. Through meditation, you are trying to make your mind clear, to clarify it, and drinking just muddles your mind. So they are dialectically opposite. So right then and there, I remember that Saturday, I said to myself, I will not drink a single drop of alcohol again in my life. And I never did. From that very moment.
Wow.
So you can see that what the influence of a single book can be. It just completely changed my life for the better, of course, because I became more efficient in the lab. I would get there earlier.
Right.
And I remember I had a girlfriend, and it was a bad relationship because of my drinking with my friends. So then that stopped. I got a new set of friends, and everything went well, and it was just so much better right away.
Right.
So that was really striking.
Right. It's great to encounter at university.
Yeah.
That's also when I encountered meditation, sort of Buddhist attitudes, and it really made everything a lot lighter and easier. And so that would be what year would be that? That be approximately in the 70s, was it, or?
No, that was what, the 80s, end of the 80s. Yeah. So
then, did you do anything did you look around for Buddhists or?
Yes. After having read that, I came across I looked in the Yellow Pages, I think, and I found
good old Yellow Pages.
Yeah, and I found it was a Zen temple, monastery, whatever, in Vancouver. I think it was on 16th Avenue or something like that. It was a Soto Zen place, so I went there, and I think I kept going for about a couple of months, but I really didn't. It was not the same thing as what I had read in the book, because I remember my first lesson was just the monk just kind of like, we spent about an hour just on my posture. So I thought that was strange, being so excessively concerned about about the posture. So I thought, oh, well, fine, this is the way it is, let's go with it. And then the second one was just, sit in front of a wall, just like that. And then the next sessions were just the same. They were with a group, and we just sat in front of a wall. But no instruction, just. And if I asked something, they would say, just sit, just sit. So I later on, I kind of understood the idea, but at that time it was a bit frustrating because I really needed more. I needed more information. I guess as a scientist, you need data to work with. This was just too dry, too abstruse in a certain way.
Right.
So, and then it was a few months after that. I saw there was some announcement on a board about a talk that was going to be given by a monk called Bhante Gunaratana at Robson Center in Vancouver. And the talk was dependent origination. I just didn't know, couldn't imagine what that was. But it's a monk, it's a Buddhist monk, so I should go. So I went there, and I was on the front row seat, and I was so eager to hear what a Buddhist monk had to say. And then there was a second shocker. That was just my knees were shaking, really. It was just so, I mean, I didn't understand half of what he said, of course, but I knew it was so deep.
Yeah.
I knew that there was so much substance, in what he was mentioning, what he was saying, and just his charisma. It was just I was really taken, and I was so taken that after the talk finished, I went with the organizer, one of the organizers, that was Kirti Senaratne, and I went to Kirti and I asked him, how can I talk to this monk? I need to talk to this monk. I have many questions. And he said, I think we can arrange this. We can arrange. Let me just talk to him. And so he went off and talked to Bante. And he came back very quickly. And he said, he'll see you tomorrow at such and such address, the Silvas, the Silvas home in Vancouver. And he'll be expecting you in the morning, 9 o'clock-ish, something like that. I said, wow, fantastic. And then what I did is I wrote down all my questions. I remember it was about 50 questions in this notebook. And the next day I arrived at the Silvas, and they were about to offer the meal to Bante. So I got to witness that, and so it was a shocker. I mean, I had never come into contact with Sri Lankans or their customs. I didn't know anything. So it was all very strange and very fascinating. And the food was fantastic. They were very hospitable. They were so nice to me. I just thought, these people are really nice. So I had great food, and then Bante said to me, after you finish with your meal, you come here and we'll talk. And so we did. And he was so kind that he not only gave me a couple of hours there, but he said, we are going to go for a walk in Stanley Park. Would you like to come with me? You come along, and we'll continue discussing this. And so it was like, I was just totally taken. It was just incredible. And then we talked for hours, and he answered all my questions, and I was just completely fascinated by the whole thing. And he said, you should come to some retreats in my monastery in West Virginia. And I said, absolutely. So to make a long story short, after a couple of months, I was doing my first 10-day retreat in West Virginia. So I got to meet all these great monks there, Bhante Rahula, Bhante Dhammaratana, and some nuns as well. So it was that's how the ball started rolling, really. Right. I had made contact now. Right. So it was fascinating.
Was there any conflict coming up with scientific attitudes and this Buddhist thing, which is just so different?
I guess not personally, but certainly in discussing Buddhism or science with other people, there seemed to be some kind of contradiction, but I really never saw any real contradiction. I mean, there are different things, obviously. I guess part of what I saw was that sometimes people wanted to fuse the two things, which I think is a mistake. Science is science and Buddhism is Buddhism. Of course, there's some commonalities, certainly, but apart from that, I really never felt it as a conflict of interest. No, certainly not.
Right. So when did you first meet me?
Remember I mentioned that Kirti introduced me to Bhante Gunaratana. So then I became friends with Kirti, and we also started going to Jim Plasek's home to meditate. So I would meet Kirti there, and then I think it was the very first time we were there. He said to me, you know what? You should know about this. There's a Canadian monk who had just arrived from Thailand, and he's in a place called Pemberton, and he's starting a monastery. I said, really? I just couldn't believe it. Yeah. So he said, I'll take you there. So I remember that was my first visit to see you at the Shak Monastery, and that was also quite an experience, because that was my first contact with an ascetic monk, and that's what really that impressed me even more. I mean, because up to that point it had been only theory and hearing talks and reading books, but I had never seen how a monk lived. So that was even more impressive,
Right.
you know, and particularly the way you lived.
Yeah.
You know, it was true asceticism. I mean, you were sort of really, it was a very extreme, at least I perceived it as a very extreme way of life, you know, because food didn't come easy and the shack was very run down, and you had to work a lot and doing repairs from scraps, and then there's so many stories. You know, there's so many stories about that. I personally saw you stoking that wood furnace every couple of hours. In winter, you didn't have almost any sleep for years. For how many years? Just
3.5 years.
Just imagine a monk never sleeping. I mean, that was really. That was. I mean, I guess when people come here to Birken and see this place, they just have no idea. They have no idea of in a certain way of who you are. Because they didn't get to see that part, and then well, Piedamo arrived, and he was also quite extreme. And so the two of you was quite a team, and it was impressive. It was really, I mean, that's what really got me. You know, I want to be at least a tenth of what they are. I would love to be like that, and that's when I sought the ordination. Yeah.
Right. So, and I remember you asked for ordination, and that you were. At that time, you were a associate professor or something?
Yes, at UBC. Research associate.
Research associate.
Yeah.
Pretty ideal job.
Yes.
Pretty hard to step out of that.
In fact,
How do you just drop out of... That's dropping out of school at an advanced stage already.
In fact, I had been offered a position at the University of Victoria. And I refused it because I had already... made up my mind. So that my supervisor was in shock. I just couldn't believe it. It was like just couldn't believe,
right.
this young chemist, being so hardworking and so on. And how could he just leave it to go and become a what?
Yeah. So this is kind of interesting that it's working out. That same mysterious question you had about why would the Buddha leave the palace?
Yeah.
Is now being answered.
Right.
Like, now you're the Buddha leaving the palace.
Right.
So
right.
This is interesting also that the first in this series was with Ajahn Pavaro, and he was also a professor of at the University of Calgary, and he left it to become a monk as well. So I seem to have this karma with professors leaving, becoming monks. So then you were the first monastic that I had given ordination to, and I had finished 10 years, and I was able to give you novice ordination. I think Ajahn Pasno came up from California to perform the first novice ordination. By that time we were at Princeton Monastery.
At Birken too.
Yeah,
yes.
Which is a very basic, but it had electricity and a flush toilets and things like that. So that was a different phase of it. So you went on and became a monk and practiced for. So how long were you in the ropes for?
So it was 1 year as a novice and then 5 years as a bhikkhu.
Right.
So overall, you could say 6 years in the monastic life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what kind of adventure was that?
Well, what can I say? I mean, if reading a book shaped my life, I could say, quite drastically, what can 6 years as a monk do? Mm-hmm. And it just, I think you once mentioned the term, it being like a lobotomy. It's like you get this very nice lobotomy, and then that's it. You're changed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For
the good,
of
course.
For the good and
for the wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a dramatic experience, and entering into a different world and different worldviews. And we eventually started, and of course, so then we went to Mexico. Now you've done some translations as well.
Yes.
So you teach as well.
Yes.
Now you're like, what are the book you translated? Mindfulness in Plain English.
That was the first book I translated. Yes, and probably the most popular.
So this is very interesting because that's Bhante Gunaratana, the first monk, Theravada monk that you met.
Right.
And that was his first book, or it wasn't his first book, but it was the first one that became very popular.
Right.
And I actually saw it in manuscript form before it was a book.
You contributed to
it.
it.
Yeah, I was working on some of the things in it. But so that's nice. And of course, I imagine when I heard that you translated into Spanish, it would be Mindfulness in Plain Spanish. But it doesn't work. That title doesn't work. So how in Spanish? What is the title?
El cultivo de la atención plena. The cultivation of mindfulness.
So you just dropped the Spanish.
The title had to change, obviously.
Some things don't work in.
Some things just don't work in a direct translation.
So we actually established a little bit at the beginning of a vihara in Mexico. I went down a few times with you, and we taught in Mexico City. And of course, translation was really easy because you'd been with me for a long time.
Right.
And so when I talked, you could instantly do the Spanish translations, and it's there's a certain class of people. I would say that Buddhism does not arrive in a culture with the poorest section. It usually arrives at the top. You saw this at the time of the Buddha. Quite often it was kings,
right,
and aristocracy,
right,
who were the first people to understand that, and then it spread out from there. So in Mexico, it's more or less the educated class that have found these by reading, and they've taken it up with quite a bit of enthusiasm as well, haven't they? The meditation and so forth.
Yes. If you recall, one of the groups we visited was Vicky Gursas.
Yes.
Vicky Gursa, she's a Mexican lady. I would say she was the pioneer in introducing the teachings in Mexico.
Right.
Yeah, she's a lay teacher up to this day, and she's devoted all her life to teaching Buddhism.
Right, and she is influenced by the Thai meditation tradition as well.
Right, correct.
And I was very amazed when I went to Mexico that the Mexicans easily adapt to the formalities that are common in Asian countries. Buddhism, they take the 5 precepts in Pali, and they wear white, and they bow, and they offer things, and that because it's a formal culture, it has the legacy of Catholic culture. It hasn't tossed out it didn't have that revolution that was in the States and Canada, the kind of the counterculture that rejected a lot of the formalities.
Yeah, very secular.
Yeah, and it's really quite comfortable as a monk to be there. It just feels that they have no problem with formalities.
Right.
And so we now you're back to, after 6 years you disrobed, and you are teaching and meditating and doing some translations
and leading retreats as well. In the retreats I've always done them at the Dhammavihara in Mexico. So you were mentioning that one of the occasions when you went there, it was just an incipient project with Venerable Usilananda, who has now passed away, and Venerable Unandisena, who has been ever since the resident monk there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's where I do the retreats every year. We have these usually 10-day retreats.
Right, and even recently I was in England in May at the World Abbots meeting, and one of the Anagarikas there was from Mexico. Right. And he's German-Mexican, and he's also a chemist, I think.
Andreas Ernstberger.
Yeah.
Yes, he's a biochemist, PhD.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of his teachers was a Nobel Prize winner in biochemistry.
Right.
So the guy is good.
Yeah.
Or he was very good.
Yeah.
As a scientist, really top.
Yeah, and I was, and he's very enthusiastic. He's looking forward to becoming a monk, and so he had come to some retreats with you. Is that
Yes,
how he?
that's how we
some-
met. Yeah, he came to one of the retreats,
Yeah.
and then after that we met in Mexico City. We talked a lot, and
Yes.
and yeah, he had this idea of becoming a monk,
Right.
and so I believe he's now a samanera. Just
Right.
he very recently became a samanera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing is this how this happens. You know, I'm going off to Asia and everything, and eventually coming back. I'm living in a broken down shack in the middle of nowhere, and then one little contact happens, and then the circle it spider webs out and goes down to Mexico, and then what about South America these days? Is there much going generally in the Spanish speaking world?
Yeah. Well, I've personally come in contact as a teacher with some people in Uruguay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I keep contact with a group there, and of course there's Argentina, but Venerable Unandisena, he takes care of that. You know, he's got the Argentinian group as well, and also he has a strong contact with Spain.
Now, Nandasena they established a forest monastery in Veracruz.
Right, that's correct.
It's nice and high. It's about 5,000 foot elevation.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a couple of retreats there. He gave a couple of retreats there. And he's a nice monk. And he's actually, so he's from Venezuela.
No, he's from Argentina.
Yeah, Argentina.
Yeah.
And so there you go. He's been a monk now for more than 20 years.
More than 20,
Yeah.
I believe, yeah.
And he came through the Burmese
Yes.
connection, U Silananda.
Usilananda.
U Silananda was also at my ordination. He's exactly the same reigns as Bhante Gunaratana. They were both at the Sixth Council in Burma in 1953 or whatever it was.
Right.
Before I was born. So and they were the youngest two monks at the council, and so they knew each other from there. So and U Silananda was at my ordination. And I to this day, I remember he offered some advice at the end of the ordination, and it was this: you must follow the Vinaya. That's all he said.
Wow.
I said, I'm up for it. And so he's again kind of a missionary monk.
Yes.
Who came to the U.S. As well as Bhante Gunaratana. They're really early pioneers, Asian monks bringing it, the Dhamma, and meditation. And in case of U Silananda, some Abhidhamma
Yes.
approach as well. And so now we have this Nandasena, Argentinian monk, and he is also making connections with South America and Spain.
Spain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Is there some kind of little culture growing in all of these countries?
Yes, in fact, he established what we call nowadays the Hispanic Institute for Buddhist Studies.
Mm-hmm.
And he's actually taken on the online thing, and we've participated in courses that we prepare online for Spanish-speaking people all over the world. So they get the courses in Spain, in South America, and so on. So it's a very interesting project.
Right.
So they built an institute sort of for it. Mm-hmm. And in fact, they're doing some construction at the monastery. They're gonna have some buildings there just specifically for the functions of the institute. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's very he's very hardworking, and he likes to teach Pali. That's his thing. Venerable Nandisena is very interested in the Pali.
Yeah. And now your present abode is in Canada?
Yes, just recently moved back to Vancouver.
Mm-hmm. But not in. You're not a professor of chemistry at.
No, I'm on early retirement.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
And is the joy of early retirement the opportunity for meditation and things like that?
Definitely, I've like the last few months I've spent quite some time doing translation. We together with another Argentinian friend, Ricardo Schwarzer, we just finished translating The Island by Ajahn Pasano and Ajahn Amaro.
Wonderful.
So that's quite a work. It's a compilation of what's written about Nibbana in the canon. So that was a real challenge. That was well, it still is, because we're still working on it. The first draft has been finished, but you can imagine just how the technicalities are really a challenge.
Yeah.
And we now have a really great editor in Mexico City, who is actually finishing the last touches on the book. So we're hoping to have a very well written version of that book. So that's what I've been working on lately.
And Ajahn Pasano and Ajahn Amaro know that you're working on this?
I believe Ajahn Amaro is the one that knows. He's been in contact with Ricardo. Because sometimes Ricardo has questions, obviously.
Yeah.
Questions will come up, so he has to talk to him directly, so he gets in touch with him.
And this is another kind of feedback loop, because Ajahn Pasano was your actual upajjhaya.
Yes.
I was the acharya, the teacher, but the actual ordination was performed by Ajahn Pasano at Abhayagiri Monastery.
Right.
So this goes
Ajahn Amaro was the Kamavacha Acharya?
Yeah.
Well?
Ajahn Amaro and I did these common memorized thing. And but Ajahn Pasano also did your novice ordination.
Yes, correct.
And we had him up in Canada at the Birken Monastery.
So
Ajahn Pasano is, just for the people watching this, is the abbot of Abhayagiri Monastery, and Ajahn Amaro, they were formerly co-abbots of that monastery. Ajahn Amaro is now at Amaravati Buddhist monastery in England. And these are the two largest of the Western branch monasteries of Ajahn Chah. And these two monks have been very, very influential and played critical roles in bringing the forest tradition to the West. And so it's really a nice, the connection is just a spider web of, you just touch it here and it spider webs out the whole Buddhist world. So in the end, quite a story. It's a little bit like The Hobbit, they go off on this mysterious journey, and the journey's not finished yet, is it?
It's not finished.
Yeah. And so it's nice to have you back at the monastery as well, and we look forward to seeing you more. And
I hope so too.
Yeah, and we encourage you to also share your Dhamma with people in teaching and translating. And who knows, maybe we'll do some English Dhamma for Spanish-speaking audiences in the future as well. And who knows, even this interview you might translate your own.
Right, my own words.
You do the whole thing in Spanish. Okay, so we appreciate your cooperation, because when we get somebody coming to the monastery, we have to interrupt their meditations to bring them up and do this interview. So we appreciate your cooperation, and I think it'll go out to many people will enjoy this. I think people are fascinated with this, the sense of the interweaving of life and practice.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Bhante.